So welcome. Thank you very much for joining this webinar for supply chain risk. Um, I'll try to keep it very quick and informative and educational as possible. So having a small research about the significant events or risks that they took over the last few years. The list starts from 2000 all the way to 2024. We have the main incidents. We have COVID. We have the Japan earthquake and tsunami. We have the floods in Thailand and a few more. For 2025, and after the research, what the internet says about what are the top 10 risks for 2025, we have the climate change and extreme weather events. We can see it everywhere. Geopolitical instability and trade tensions, cybersecurity threats, rare earth metals and critical resource shortages, semiconductor shortages, labor shortages, inflation and rising operational costs, ESG compliance, technology integration, and port congestion and infrastructure strain. Now, if we try to summarize everything and put them into specific groups, we have the natural phenomena and weather conditions, whether they're hurricanes, floods, wildfires, tsunamis. Cybersecurity, there were some attacks in the past in very well-known shipping companies in Maersk and in Costco. Of course, we have economic. The first and top pictures are from the first Donald Trump presidency. We have Brexit, we have the trade wars with China, now we have the tariffs. And geopolitical, which are wars, terrorist attacks in different corners of the world. Now, having all these, how are all these risks linked with supply chain risk? And that's where it starts getting interesting, because all of that is kind of not very easy to manage. How can we as supply chain managers influence, protect ourselves, the supply chains from that? Could be a comet, it could be an alien invasion or a nuclear holocaust. There are limited things we can do in things like that. Now, the next thing I did was I looked through the internet to understand what are the services, what are the companies offering in terms of supply chain risk, whether tools, services, and the summary is they're around business continuity management, which again, question mark, which part of it is business and which of it is supply chain related. Supply chain insurance, event and alerting services. So something happens, immediately you get a notification. And there are a few tools where you can see which suppliers or customers you have in that area in order to alert you approximately what kind of products may be impacted, or raw materials, or POs. Anti-counterfeiting solutions, temperature control solutions, sustainability, and CSR services. Then we have cargo tracing and security to avoid theft, hedging tools and services, contract SLAs, vendor third-party compliance, IT security, inventory optimization, demand forecasting, supply chain mapping, supply chain data integration, supply chain modeling, health and safety, intellectual property, and reputation. Now, these were, and according to the research that I've done, these are companies that they have services claiming that somehow by using their services, you reduce the risk in your supply chain, which partially it's correct, partially it's not. We'll see later. So having all of that is still the question, okay, we have different risk or events or threats. We have all these services, but what is a holistic? How can we use supply chain risk management in a more holistic way to be ahead of the game when it comes to managing our supply chain? The next thing I want to talk about is some of the myths. Because in the media, and especially now with the social media and the hyper advertising, there are a lot of terms that are flying around which are not quite true. So, when it comes to supply chain risk and risks in general, there is a lot of effort. Okay, third party or vendor risk audits. There is an effort to go for the known risks, but we need to keep in mind that there are unknown risks. There are things that will, it's out of our visibility, it's out of our knowledge, and these are probably the ones that will hit us. Does it mean that we shouldn't try to get as many known as possible? Of course we do, but it should be in the right context. We shouldn't focus only on that. And I'll explain later why we should focus on the value chain, the supply chain, not on identifying threats. A lot of companies and many professionals, I hear, oh, we have a risk process. We do in our projects. When we have a vendor, a supplier, or with a customer, there is a new opportunity. We do a new business case, or before we give a proposal, we do a probability versus impact scoring of the risks. Now, this is not this is not very practical. I mean, in one way, I'm sure at some point in time, all of us used and scored in terms of a risk matrix, what is the probability and the impact on specific things. Now, the problem is that it's very biased. It represents our opinion or the group opinion, the project team, let's say, at that specific time. The question is, how is that tracked moving forward? And that influences the decision maker. So if we give that picture with green, yellow, amber, and red colors, in a way, we are influencing the decision makers towards the red colors. Green is good, yellow, it's okay, we can get by. Amber and red, okay, there are more difficult, there are more crucial areas to look at. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the greens, right? So the coloring system is not the best and it's not helping in this likelihood impact. Also, the probability is most times is not coming from a statistic measurement. Is our feeling, is our gut feeling or the groups, how probable something to happen or not. The next thing is risk mitigation. Everyone is talking about reducing risk. Mitigation means reduction. But this is not an accurate terminology. We'll see in a few slides why this is not true. When we're talking about risk mitigation, it's we consider already everything as a threat, and we try to reduce the exposure we have in that threat. But risk is not only threats; it includes opportunities. And the last part is the resilience or continuity. There is a lot of discussion, there are a lot of articles about the supply chain, or as a supply chain professional, you need to have a resilient, you need to ensure continuity of your supply chain. But this is the outcome of a successful and proper supply chain risk management process. So the development over the years of supply chain risk management as a concept, as theory, and everything, it signifies this exactly summarized in this picture. So supply chain risk management is something big, like an elephant. And everyone from their own point of view, whether it's procurement or transportation or planning, inventory management, they are tackling supply chain risk management from their narrow side and viewpoint of their direct, let's say, responsibilities. And this is also reflected in the academia and the overall development of supply chain risk management as a discipline. A few years back, it was quite famous. We could hear it a lot in the news and the social media, but now it has moved out a little bit. Now, if we go back a little bit to history, what is risk? Just to start and putting things into the right context. Risk is coming from the Italian word risicare, and it means to dare. And it started in the 17th century from somebody who wanted to gamble, found a mathematician, and used him in his gambling activities. And through that, it was quite clear that risk means managing the probabilities between gains and losses. But somehow down the line, and when we went to the 20th century, this gain and losses kind of got lost, and the meaning of risk was more meaning, and we were using it, and especially definitely in the supply chain discipline, it meant managing threats or how do we manage our losses. But this is not the origins, and this is not the financial risk management process. So instead of using this, supply chain risk management developed as a discipline from the threat point of view, risk mitigation, reducing the threat. So we started, let's say, with the wrong foot. So to put everything into the right perspective, there are two disciplines. It's supply chain management, and as supply chain professionals, we are interested in performance, managing human resources, assets, information, and making sure that goods will be delivered, whether finished goods or raw materials will be delivered on time in the most cost-efficient way. We have to manage suppliers and connect customers, processes. While on the other side, risk management is more concerned and focused around the uncertainty, opportunity, and threats. The bias perception of humans, risk framework, risk theory, the continuity of the business, and what is very, very it's not a clear cut. You always decide something while leaving something else behind. So there's always the trade-offs. Which are the trade-offs you believe are more relevant to the specific decision? So, the number one risk for supply chain and anywhere is, of course, you. It's the human factor. And why is that? So there are four spheres of uncertainty, or let's say four groupings, where we can put all different events or risk areas, whether are opportunities or threats. We can categorize them into four areas: the environment, the network, the company, and the ego, as I call it, or the human individual. Now, the reason for that is, as a human person, we make decisions. We decide things, or maybe we don't decide something, we delay. There is still risk associated with non-taking a decision. But at the end of the day, we control ourselves, and every human person, every individual, stakeholder, decision maker, they can control themselves. When we go to company-wide, then we interact and we have to negotiate, we have to sell our ideas, or we have to pitch our decision on what we want to do into other departments, other stakeholders within the company. So we are losing the control of that decision. There is a part of uncertainty of whether a specific decision or a project will go through. When this goes to a network level, the control reduces even more. If we have, as a company, a strong position within the overall supply chain, we can leverage that and negotiate and bring specific customers or specific suppliers closer to our positions. If not, then we have less control over what we can do, and we are following the trends of the network, our competitors, or how the industry is going. And of course, when it goes to environment, is everything that is not directly linked to a network. So suppliers, customers, other partners linked directly with us transactionally, that's part of the network. Anything else can be considered as the environment. Now, the uncertainty, while the control from the individual to the environment reduces, it's the opposite when it comes to the uncertainty. And this is why the control it's reversed. So if you consider, for example, on every specific event or something is happening, whether you can control it directly or whether you can influence it or not influence it at all, then it gives you a good feel of when something happens, how much you can influence, and it's the baseline, the absolute baseline to use when you start a supply chain risk categorization or risk management program. When you have the different categories and you different risk grouped into each of this, you can start developing countermeasures and process of how to deal with these risks. Now, why the person is so important? Simply because every person has their own bias. Every department, they have their own view, they have their own interest, they have their own approach, even if it's within the same supply chain department, procurement versus warehousing on inventory management or customer service. Everyone, the planners, they're looking at it from a different angle. So it's the sum of all. It's not my view or this department is better than the other to decide something. So it's always important to be aware of whether something is personal opinion or whether it's the department opinion, or whether it's just need to include that into our consideration. And then, of course, every individual has their own style, their own patterns of how we judge things, of how we make decisions. Now, assuming these blocks on the picture, they are data, right? So we have this data, and then maybe somebody's asking us to create something with the data, and this is our job. But the different individuals may use the specific data in a different way. And this is also something we often neglect. Now, okay, these little blocks are very simple, but what represent is on the one side is something more standardized, and on the other side, it's a bit more creative. So when companies are focusing on standardization, and normally the bigger the company, the more standardized the processes must be to control everything, while at the same time expecting creative solutions or creative ideas, it's a risk area, right? It's not working together. You need to be aware that standardizing is creating a company bias to all employees, is putting the same glasses to every single employee. So this is also the something we need to consider when we have data, reports, information. Do we have a specific scenario, a more standard guided way of interpreting the data and the information, or we are free to brainstorm and come up with an optimum solution? Through my PhD research, something that was a bit accidental, but very, very interesting, while I was analyzing the data, the surveys, the questions from the surveys, collect all the answers. It the questionnaire and all the answers were statistically significant. They came to 5 levels. There was a tree, a decision tree pattern. So from a random questionnaire that was created, there is a specific pattern with a 79% confidence level. That means that there is a predictability of the answers up to 79%, and this was not the intention. It came out of the analysis. So this is very important because what it's telling us is that with 79% confidence level, we go through a specific set of questions, and by answering the first one, we can predict the different choices that people can make. And this is very important. It's an aspect that is not something that we think about. And if we consider a little bit the greatness of the supply chain, normally we have something simple going around. Of course, in reality, it's more like a neural network with a lot of organizations and companies working in different parts, in different geographies. But what we often overlook is that there is a huge number of people with patterns making decisions in specific ways, and that will not change drastically. It might shift a little bit, but overall, it's predictable. The rest, when it comes to supply chain risk management, and I'm just going to guide you through the different levels just to show how complex it is. It's not something simple as a term. There are different dimensions when it comes to risk and how we categorize a risk. So we have the pure and the speculative. We have the objective and the subjective. And this has to do with whether they are quantifiable, so we can measure these risks, or they are not quantifiable, and we cannot measure them in any way. Pure versus speculative. The pure is related to the negative or neutral state. So when it comes to risk, we expect something, and that will only be what we expect, or there will be no change to our expectation, or there will be a negative impact. Normally, health and safety issues are pure risks, but anything else, or the majority of the other risks, are speculative risks, which means we are not very sure when we make an inventory forecast, or we buy from a supplier a specific minimum order quantity, or we're setting certain things. We're not exactly sure that this will actually be the optimum or the best choice. It could be for our benefit at the end of the day. It could be exactly as we calculated, or it could be on a negative way. So considering everything in a speculative, with a speculative definition, it broadens up more options, and of course puts back in the game the opportunity, because risk mitigation means pure, only managing the losses. There are different frameworks, but in terms of supply chain risk management, there is no framework that tackles supply chain risk management. The closest is the ISO 31000. There are also and a few other frameworks, but they are more into enterprise risk management. And for supply chain risk management, you need a combination. You need to cherry pick from the SCORE model, the EFQM model, and the ISO 31000. So in order to create a successful supply chain risk management program, you need to go through existing tools, existing frameworks, and cherry pick to create a tool that will help you manage risks across the whole supply chain, not just your organization. Now, before we categorize risks, we need to break them down and understand what a risk is. Not one thing. It's a component of a subject, a cause, and a factor. And understanding this and how these work and what is the difference when it comes to the threat and the opportunity, it will help us go to the next step, measure it, categorize it, and if we cannot measure it, then develop a solution or an action in case something happens, what do we do? A response proactively. The timing is very important when it comes to risk. Now, the risk factors in a supply chain, we shouldn't focus so much about whether there will be a wildfire, a tsunami, an earthquake, or whether Trump will put tariffs 50% or 30%. We should focus more on our supply chain. Equally as Trump one day might increase the tariffs, after a month it might reduce the tariffs. So this is very short term. Our supply chain, unless we can swap customers and suppliers very easily, then of course we could go down that road. But our supply chains are a lot more inflexible, difficult to swap and change. So we should focus on our supply chain. How can we make it more flexible in specific geographies, in terms of assets, in terms of human resources, materials? Do we have, is there a specific geography that we get a specific material or SKU very crucial to our production? Maybe we should diversify. In terms of information, what do we do? It's not our job as supply chain professionals to manage cyber security. That's IT's. But for us, in case there is a disruption, we need to be able, what is the minimum of information we need to operate? A PO, a phone to call and say, a fax, an email, a PDF. So we need to be able to develop this kind of counter processes. And of course, financial. If there is a disruption of the financial flow somewhere in the supply chain, we need to be alerted, because that could have impact on our third-party providers or suppliers or customers and so forth. Some other dimensions are whether the risk is passive or active. Sometimes we are doing things, we are creating risk, we are enhancing or amplifying. So we are passively influencing a risk. While when it's active, it's when we are kind of the receivers of that outcome, whether it's positive or negative. Another dimension that we need to categorize the risk is operational, tactical, and strategic. So if you go back to the probability impact matrix, just to simplify things and make it a lot more simplified, we shouldn't have that, but we should try to have what is operational with small impact, tactical, and strategic. Strategic is more difficult, more time consuming to develop anything or counter or react. Tactical, let's say weeks and months, and operational days. And proactive and reactive. This is also very important to understand, that we can do a lot of things before something happens, but when it happens, it stops being supply chain risk management and moves into crisis management. Either we firefight trying to figure out what to do and react to that event, whether it's positive, how to gain more, let's say, revenue, more market share, or reduce losses, or avoid a disruption. And then in the end, these outcomes, these actions, there is a specific process to follow how to develop these actions. And at the end of this process, there are 8, let's say, decisions, whether we accept the risk, we diversify, we consolidate. We need to go through a more structured approach and see in the end, depending the value at risk, which is very important to calculate and have specific key metrics that will help us to categorize and understand easier the different risks associated with what kind of an impact to our business. It might not be financial, it might be something else. So some of the key things that we should try to create data and understanding around what it takes, the frequency of a specific effects, Are there specific parts of our supply chain that come with challenges or disruptions, or there are issues? We need to try to see what is the frequency of this and whether it makes sense to invest or not. And then we go again into a different chapter of the return on investment and how do we calculate and how do we sell to our decision makers the investment versus something that could happen in the future. The duration of effects, time to decide, time to respond, these two, and time to normalize. So these three timings are very important because if we are expecting there is an event and we respond within a day, while our decision-making process takes a week or 2 weeks to go through the different um, channels, different departments, the hierarchy, escalations, and all of that, it's unrealistic. It's doomed to fail from the beginning. So it's very important to understand. In some cases, do some tests. We should test whether a specific supplier, we call them, there is something wrong. We do an exercise. What do you do if this happens and if you don't have that? Come back with a specific solution. And time to normalize. If something happens, a specific node, supplier, or specific part of our supply chain from point A to point B is disrupted, or how long does it take to normalize? There could be a smooth or a soft impact, prices of freight going up or down. And then, of course, it's the value at risk. This is something more related to us, and this should be easier to calculate depending on the different flows, the cost of the operational costs, and the value of the goods in every single step of the value chain. Now, and this is where the risk becomes more interesting in supply chain. So we make specific decisions. We can get the different parts of their supply chain where it's not maybe smooth. There are incidents. Do we want to? What is the value at risk in every part of our supply chain on every leg? And then we can see whether it's significant and we should invest or not. There are different ways of calculating the value at risk: historical simulation, Monte Carlo, condition-based stress testing. And in the end, couldn't find a better visual to show that we do a forecast or we do our budgets. So we have in 2 or 3 months, we have an expect there is a dot. That's how much we're going to bring, so many containers or so many trips, so many pallets, inbound, outbound, revenues. But in reality, everything is dynamic. It changes, it's never like that. So there are trends that are impacting and influencing, and we should be able to understand how this change in the future, what is the value at risk at every given time to help us create a proper risk decision-making mechanism. So to conclude, well, almost about what is risk and how to properly understand it within the context of a supply chain is the uncertain variation of expected outcomes over uncertain times, because we don't know whether there will be a variation. We don't know when this might happen. And we don't know exactly the timing. But nevertheless, we should be able, and this is our goal, to try every step of our supply chain to understand, ideally, instead of putting a risk, a percentage, to put a value at risk throughout the whole process. Now, another way trying to help you visualize it, that the supply chain is not one thing. It's very common that we think of a supply chain as the physical flow of goods, but actually we could overlay different supply chains, the information or value, risk or cost, or CO2 emissions, what is an optimal network, what is the current network, different risks. So we could put different parameters and create different supply chain network, different versions, let's say, of our own network. And then overlaying them one on top of the others, multiple layers, is the question is combining them, how do we model them? That's where modeling or more complex supply chain modeling comes into play. To be able to, it's not just the cost where we tend to do all our business cases. There are multiple different criteria depending on what is more relevant for you as a company, as an industry, as a supply chain, and so forth. So supply chain risk management, at the end of the day, it's the evolution of supply chain management. So from different operations, more localized, we start having more consolidated advancements, supply chain management, lean. Then we move to control towers and 4PLs and digitizing the data. And supply chain risk, the benefit is how do we calculate, how do we always come with knowing more scenarios of our existing supply chain. The more scenarios we can calculate, we can track and trace that today the tendency is towards this scenario, and that has specific benefits and negatives, the opportunities and the threats. And of course, because the scenarios can be almost infinite, that's where the AI can play a massive role in calculating and keep us all the time updated with this. But stepping directly to the AI without doing the work and setting up the modeling and doing continuous modeling, let's say dynamic modeling of our supply chain, it will not work. And this is another risk that I see many companies heading to. They're just jumping to whatever is the current hype, AI everywhere, AI in supply chain analytics, AI. So the key components for a successful supply chain risk management, because we can do it once as an ad hoc, but if we don't digitize the process, then it's very difficult to align our internal stakeholders, gather data, and give them back with something that will help them make a decision about what's happening in our supply chain direct and how our supply chain is affected by different things out of our supply chain. So data integration with as many as possible other players, suppliers, partners, different 3PLs is important. Supply chain modeling to be able to model different scenarios, and of course AI to make that dynamic, because it's impossible to run manually multiple hundreds of scenarios every day. So this is how we move with these three key parts into dynamic supply chain modeling, and then that's actually the next level. It's the supply chain risk management. So just a few things. Everything is the beginning of everything in supply chain risk management center started with the PhD in the area and my curiosity to try to explore what supply chain risk is all about. And then linking it into a course, creating an online course. There is one that explains, that takes everything from the history all the way as a foundational course, explains all the different parameters and a lot of what I've just shown you, but in more detail and elaborating a lot more. But there will be more online courses regarding and expanding more into the decision and how to apply, how to create a supply chain risk management framework that could later on be digitized. So the process, the involvement of which key stakeholders and how this can be digitized. And Genus, which is our modeling platform, it's mainly more on data integration and optimizing the location, but it's the baseline for trying to link everything that we've discussed with automating and adding more of the risk factors in it. So this is it as a crash course. So this is just the RFQ code for the online course in case you're interested to learn more. And thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll stop sharing. You can type on the chat to discuss now, or you can send me an email or ping me on LinkedIn to answer and further discuss. And we are 2 minutes earlier than so great. Thank you very much. Again, if you have any questions, send me an email, reach out to me, and I'll be happy to explain and further discuss. Thank you very much.